Good evening, campers, it's me, Kira, and today we are going to talk about Boris Johnson's autobiography. What? A lot of people don't know this, but I'm interested in politics, and I would quite safely say that one of the most important politicians within recent history is Boris Johnson. Now, before we get into the book itself, I think it's worthwhile having a recap of who Boris Johnson is. And the reason I'm doing that is that the majority of people who watch me aren't actually in the UK. But you have to understand that Boris Johnson has been in the mind of normal Brits for a very long time prior to him being the Prime Minister, before he won an absolute landslide victory against Jeremy Corbyn in 2019. Boris Johnson, growing up, all you need to know is that he's rich. He attends Eton College, one of the most prestigious schools in the UK, and also attends Oxford University, of which he becomes a member of the Bullingdon Club. If you are British, you know the Bullingdon Club. One, on a fact, and two, on a potential rumour that might have been a Black Mirror episode. Here's a fun little game. Without telling you which one, you can guess within the comments. First one you have to get is that the Bullingdon Club go into restaurants and absolutely wreck the place, but because they're extraordinarily wealthy, can fit the entire bill and more to renovate it. Also, after this, they would also burn like £50 notes in front of homeless people because, again, they can afford it and the homeless people really want the money, but they can burn it because that's fun. And I wonder why people don't like the English that much. The second one you have to guess is that Boris Johnson was around the same time as David Cameron, and David Cameron might have put his penis in a pig's mouth. People thought Saltburn was a little bit raucous. Nevertheless, Boris Johnson is a very clever person, and that's something that I need to stress throughout all of this. Despite what you think of Boris Johnson or how he presents himself, we'll touch on that later. Actually, before he came into politics, was a journalist, where he did say some interesting things during his time, but nevertheless his career came to an end when he fabricated quotes. Without a job and a lot of time on his hands, Boris Johnson tried politics and in 2001 became an MP for Henley. There's something that you need to know about Boris Johnson, and that he is charismatic. The British people, prior to him becoming Prime Minister, really liked Boris Johnson. He is bubbly, he's enthusiastic, he could tell a story, he's quirky, he's irreverent, and he's personable. I think it would be hard to find a normal Brit who aren't just like, I hate the Tories, the Tories are the worst thing in the world. I think it's very hard to find. It's very easy to find those people online. But the ordinary Brit, myself included, I find myself quite drawn to Boris Johnson before his premiership. This is before he becomes Prime Minister. Remember that, before he becomes Prime Minister. He's just entertaining. A lot of people ascribe like Boris Johnson, or Bojo as he's known, as something akin to a Trump character. And I would argue they are two very different characters. Both Trump and Boris Johnson are exceptionally switched on. I don't care what you say. They are great orators, unorthodox. It should not work, but they have a way of bringing people in. And I wonder why people don't like the English that much. And I have to say, I quite like the character of Boris Johnson. He's been on numerous TV shows before he was Prime Minister. All of his gaffes, his mishaps, everything that he does wrong, he seems to be able to brush under the carpet because he comes across, would you believe it, like a bumbling oaf. It has been long and well known to the British public that Boris Johnson's hair is like part of the act. Like before he goes on to speak, he ruffles it all up so he looks completely unprepared, only for Boris Johnson to really knock people down. He is, no matter what you think of the guy, he is a politician through and through. He knows how to spin things. He knows how to orate. And most importantly, he knows how to get people to listen to him. So much so, in 2008, he runs for Mayor of London. And no one thinks he's going to get it. No one thinks he's going to get it. This blithering idiot, he comes across so unprofessional. No one's going to vote for him. He only wins it. His charms, his idiosyncrasies, that is compelling. Like, we all know this image. And again, Boris Johnson is one of the most impressive politicians that we've had. Politically, I don't see eye to eye with Boris Johnson. We don't align much. There's a few things that we agree on, yes, but with every politician, they go in to say something that you agree with at some point. It's not like, this isn't like, I hate the Tories, everything the Tories do are ridiculous. Again, you'll find these people very easily online. But honestly, most Brits will agree with Boris Johnson on something, and Boris Johnson knows what the people want. He's populist by that means. Again, populist, remember when that didn't really mean like a bad thing? Like, Obama was a populist. He wanted the popular thing, and that was good. And then Trump came along. Now we don't like that. But Boris Johnson, he's a populist. He knows what the people want, and if that gets him the vote, if he's able to persuade people to look at some aspects while not really talk about some other aspects, he's got more people involved. Populism works, people. It's not really that much of a bad thing, as he is trying to make himself represent the common Brit, where he in fact is in like the 1%. Everything about Boris Johnson does not represent the common Brit. Boris Johnson is adept to understanding what the popular voice wants and gets enthusiasm built up with them, which ultimately makes people like Boris Johnson and feels as though he is representing themselves. Again, populism is not a bad thing. Obama did it. But again, Trump did it, and we didn't really like that. But hey, the common person changes. Attitudes, politics, trends, the whole shebang changes. Populism is not inherently good or bad, despite what the crazy people online will tell you. Again, I'm fully aware I'm oversimplifying this, but there has been a rift in the country. There's this thing that many Brits, and maybe everyone's sick of Brits talking, I think I'm sick of Brits talking about it, to be honest. It was so long ago. There's this thing called Brexit. That's where Britain severs ties off with the EU. And there were two parties, the Remainers and the Leave party. Now, would you believe it? Most people thought that we were just going to remain. And in fact, myself, I wanted to remain. Some people, Boris Johnson, and you might have heard of this guy, Nigel Farage, wanted to leave. Again, I'm really oversimplifying this, but these are like the two main figureheads of the Leave. They wanted Britain to have control of its own borders, to be more autonomous, and to not listen to the EU. Now, Britain did done gone get Brexited, to the dismay of many people online, who again still won't shut up about it. We've done it. The damage has been done. We've done it. We all voted. The popular vote won. I don't care if it was 52-48. You had to get 51%, okay? They got 52. They won fair and square. As something that Boris Johnson actually does talk about within this book, I have to agree with him. The Leave vote seemed to be the vote that no one thought was going to win. But there was enthusiasm by the people who wanted to leave. There was enough people who were disproportionately marginalised, who were downtrodden on and saw no real benefit to EU, that the idea that everything could improve if they were to leave is very enticing to want to leave. And Boris Johnson could understand, and I think he could see through, that what people thought was a small minority was actually the popular opinion. I want to say it was somewhat carnivalesque. People look at the Leave campaign, and still do today, as this ridiculous, like, buffoonery act. Like, oh, how stupid are these people? Oh, they got their statistics wrong. The statistics, everyone's going to talk about the bus, aren't they? We're going to talk about the bus. Yes, the statistics were misleading and people were misled. But nevertheless, the bus itself did not, like, magic up people wanting to leave. There are more factors that people are forgetting about. And if you want to say that the people who voted Leave are idiots, that they're uneducated, that they're racist, that they're bigoted, of which I've covered this topic on many other videos where I'll say the exact same thing here, You do not realise what people in this country are going through. People within Britain, within the early 2010s and still to this day, have increasingly seen levels of austerity. They have seen themselves being more disparate within society that they've never felt before prior to 2010. That things have categorically, very slowly, got worse within this country. So while I myself wanted to remain within the EU, I fully understand and appreciate the Leave vote. I understand why the Leave vote was put on the cards, even though David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, might have felt like me that no one's actually going to vote this in. We have a few dissident voices within government and outside government. Yes, we're looking at you, Nigel Farage. You've only just become an MP, and people still keep forgetting that. But how could Boris Johnson and a few others turn the tide? How could they somewhat defy the odds? And Boris Johnson, we can say, throughout his leadership campaign, him against Jeremy Corbyn, he defied the odds. There was a lot of media attention and people my age who thought Jeremy Corbyn was going to win. Absolutely no doubt that we had had enough of austerity measures. We are going to place that all onto the Tory party. But Jeremy Corbyn was the answer. So much so he went on to the Glastonbury Festival to talk about Ozymandias by Percy Shelley to a bunch of people at the music festival that is known for being like just full of drunks and full of people off their faces. He's appealing to a group of people who weren't in, I would argue, their soundest of minds. Like they weren't really that interested in politics during that precise moment. But everyone thought Jeremy Corbyn was going to win. I myself, I didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. I will quite happily say I didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. I suppose you could boil it down into Jeremy Corbyn, people were interested in, but didn't like him. Boris Johnson, people were definitely interested in him. They were entertained by him, and they liked him. I remember having numerous conversations with friends about the 2019 general election, like the build-up to it, and people being like, yeah, I think Boris Johnson's got this. Like, we're not going to vote for him, but like, I quite like Boris Johnson. Like, that was like a general thing that I heard a lot of time. People being like, I wouldn't vote for the man, but you know what? I quite like him. It's his characterisms. It's the way he speaks, his way that he intones, the way he orates. Again, it is highly captivating. And going into this book, I have to say, it's written as if it's Boris Johnson. It is, oh, my friend, let me tell you about the time I was a wee little scamp and daddykins. He has written multiple pieces. He has written multiple legislations. He has dealt with higher people all around the world. He knows how to convey himself. And his almost lyrical, bumbling quality transfers onto a page. It's quite amazing. It's so good. And it is unashamedly Boris Johnson. Because one thing that Boris Johnson can do is rally people to listen to him. The only thing he can't do, it seems, is to reflect. Nothing within this book does Boris Johnson reflect on those actions. And it comes across exceptionally narcissistic. That even from the beginning all the way to the end, Boris Johnson is the solution to all of life's problems. The reason he steps up as party leader to become the Prime Minister is because Theresa May did everything wrong and I am the best thing. And at the end, 60 of his MPs go against him. So he leaves not because of the actions that he did, but it's almost as if no one has his back. Boris Johnson, throughout his autobiography, sees himself as the Conservatives' last hope. Like, he is the only thing that can hold the party together. Now, in recent events, we've seen the end of the Tories' 14 years in power, and now Labour have come back into power with Keir Starmer leading. Boris Johnson sees himself as the only hope for the Conservative Party, and since Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party have been in a little bit of a crisis. As I'm recording, we're still awaited for who's going to be the next leader of the opposition, the head of the Conservative Party. Now that Rishi Sunak has stepped down, and it's likely that Kemi Badenoch might be the leader of the opposition. You'll have to wait and see, people. There has been a crisis of who is going to take the Tory party forward. In recent politics as well, we now have seen the exceptional rise of the Reform Party, a party that everyone, again, thought they're not going to be that important. Nigel Farage took the helm off Richard Tice. He would argue that he didn't, but he took the helm off Richard Tice, and the Reform Party did exceptionally well. They're now heralding themselves as the new right-wing party of the UK. The Tory party is in a very difficult circumstance because they are not very right-wing anymore. I would personally argue that the Conservatives are more centre-right, but now they're sandwiched between the Labour Party and Reform, and Reform seem to be taking more and more Tory votes away from it because the Reform Party are populist. They know what the common British person wants, and they are tapping into it. And we're seeing Farage pulling a lot of the same games as Boris Johnson, or at least my opinion. But at the end of Unleashed, it seems as though, is Boris Johnson making a political comeback off the cards, despite all the scandals, all the ridicule, all the betrayal of the British people? It still seems as though Boris Johnson coming back and making a political return is on the cards. Boris Johnson sees as though he has done nothing wrong, but everything is done under the guise of, I am doing everything that is best of the country. In one of the more weirder aspects of this book, he talks about the time during the COVID period, which was a difficult period, and I would equally say that any politician would struggle during COVID of knowing what to do in a global pandemic, something that we've never really lived through before. How do you tackle it? Could you have done it better than Boris Johnson? Someone online's probably got all the answers, but did Boris Johnson do the best that he could? He feels as though he's done exceptionally well. But again, one of the weirder moments is that Boris Johnson, during all of this, got COVID. And he writes about, within these, possible final moment, how he needed to steer Britain forward. And it's a really weird, it's a really jarring passage that I think really puts you into the mind of Boris Johnson. That it's not really a personal reflection of these are my dying days. What is all of this for? He doesn't reflect. He doesn't reflect. He's more but I have a job and I must be the person who leads Britain to betterment. Now, I'm not expecting Boris Johnson to almost throw himself on the tracks as this sacrificial lamb going, I did everything wrong. He's not going to do that. And most people, when they're writing their autobiography, are not going to do that. Isn't that right, Blodwen? Boris Johnson almost detaches from himself. It's Boris Johnson in writing, but not in substance. And I hope that makes sense. If you look at Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, you kind of had Prince Harry really awkwardly, I know, Brodwin, it was really boring, really awkwardly say oh, I think this is what I did and maybe I could have done some things better. I mean, even if you disagreed with Harry, you could understand roughly where he's coming from or why he might be wanted to frame certain things. Boris Johnson does not do that. This is the position you're going with. Thank you, Blodwen. Boris Johnson, similar to that he did in many select committees, does not so much defend himself, he deflects everything. So much so that the Partygate scandal that, definitely did happen, because we all know it happened because there were videos that took place while it was happening, he just goes, you know what, I wish I never apologised for that because it didn't happen. And you just go but it did. But it did. And I think this is the difficulty of Boris Johnson. He is so affectionately likeable that's become more like his demise. The British people who voted you in entrusted you to do things, and by seeming relatable, people wanted to see what they wanted enacted. And Boris Johnson, sadly, under his leadership, undid all trust. And this is why I would say the Conservative Party are in absolute disarray and in pieces, because no one trusts them. Not a single British person, apart from the pure-blood Tory supporters who cannot think of voting anything else. The British people do not trust that the Tories will do anything for them. That is why Rishi Sunak lost. No one has trust in the Conservatives. And it is, in my opinion, Boris Johnson who has undone all the hard work of the Conservatives before. For the common Brit who didn't see politically eye to eye with him, who found him a figure of, again, irreverence and somewhat relatability, despite the fact he is completely unrelatable, no one likes him. Quite simply, no one likes Boris Johnson anymore. If you ask anyone about Boris Johnson, you would not going to have nice words. I suppose what I thought was going to happen within this autobiography is that Boris Johnson was going to come across relatable. That's been his thing, to be relatable. And in fact, he's somewhat alienated me even further. He's Boris Johnson within the words, but not within the substance. Really weirdly, this book is a simulacra of his political leadership. It completely mirrors what has happened. And I think it's going to further bring disillusionment of Boris's campaign. I think it's going to bring more vitriol towards him. But ultimately, if he does come back to politics, I think he's going to have a very sharp shock of what the common person thinks. Because a lot of people don't even want to read what he's got to say. I don't even think they're going to listen anymore.